Hiyori, a clumsy and extremely weak teacher. At that moment, she was arriving at her first class with the group and had possibly tripped or bumped into something before getting there. However, her students were unaware of this and believed she was cursing them in some way with her piercing gaze and incomprehensible words. And so, on the very first day, a rumor spread that she would curse those who made her angry. On his way home, our protagonist, Abikura, was discussing this with his friend. But then, he realized he had forgotten some papers in the classroom and went back to retrieve them. That was when he encountered the so-called scary teacher. She was practicing how to speak. Seeing this, he was left speechless and, before she could notice him, he quickly hid. He wondered if that was really the teacher everyone was talking about and what she was doing there. Trembling and breathless, Hiyori then said that the class was about to begin. However, classes were already over, and there were no students there, only plush toys. This immediately brought the rumors to mind, and Abikura wondered if she was using them to curse some of the students. She continued, then asked one of the plushies a question, which, of course, did not answer, prompting her to respond herself, simulating a conversation. Since her question was answered correctly, she awarded 100 points. With this, Abikura realized that she was merely practicing a lesson, but he also noticed that her voice was very shaky and barely audible. She also seemed to realize this, and began doing what appeared to be a contraction to take a deep breath. But it was nothing like that. What she actually did was remove her blazer, leaving him utterly confused. Hiyori then started taking deep breaths, and he wondered if she was clueless enough to have done that just to check if her stomach was contracting. She kept trying to take deep breaths but quickly got tired. Now, enjoying the pleasure of that marvelous sight, Abikura realized that she was not scary or strange at all. She was just weak and shy. Watching her, his heart beat faster than ever, and he noticed he couldn't take his eyes off her. Completely exhausted, Hiyori decided to take a seat, but she had pushed her chair away earlier and was about to fall hard. So, without thinking, Abikura rushed toward her and threw himself where she was going to fall, making her land on top of him. She was utterly confused by what had happened, and he then explained that he had come back to retrieve something he had forgotten and ended up seeing her practicing or something like that, which left her completely flustered. Moments later, she admitted that she had social anxiety, wasn't very athletic, and was a bit clumsy. But she had the dream of becoming a teacher. This was her first year teaching, so she thought she needed to do her best. With her voice growing softer, Hiyori continued, saying that she had gotten distracted that morning and bumped into the door, which explained the injury from earlier. She then remembered she needed to check her plan for the next lesson, flipping through her notebook filled with notes. One of the pages slipped out of the book, and she accidentally stepped on it, slipping and colliding with him, prompting her to apologize. And just like that, everything made sense. The book that was thought to contain curses, her incomprehensible words, now it was clear. The truth was that she had a cute voice, wasn't very strong, but was quite dedicated. A weak and shy teacher. After everything was cleared up, Abikura said he was leaving, but Hiyori asked him to wait. However, he didn't understand what she had said. She then approached him, and close to his ear, she thanked him for saving her earlier when she fell. Now, finally heading home, Abikura realized he was completely in love with her. The next day, Hiyori was once again unintentionally scaring the students by dragging a garbage bag, its contents appearing to be something else entirely. They suspiciously wondered what was inside. They didn't know it, but their teacher was just very weak and shy. After finally reaching the disposal area with great effort, she was asked why she was so exhausted. After all, the bag only contained styrofoam packaging. Later, Abikura was now sweeping behind the school, or at least trying to, as he couldn't get Hiyori out of his mind. Everyone feared her, and even though she sometimes seemed to be casting curses, the truth was that she was a very dedicated teacher. But only he knew that. He then realized he had wasted too much time thinking and went back to cleaning. However, as he was leaving after finishing his task, there she was again, wearing exercise clothes and stretching. Or at least trying to. Once again, Abikura saw something he shouldn't and quickly hid. He wondered what she was doing there dressed like that since she wasn't a physical education teacher. He then concluded that she was probably trying to improve her weak and shy nature. However, this didn't explain the jacket she was wearing, which clearly belonged to a student and not her. The large name printed on it gave it away, as did the size. It looked quite tight on her. As if that weren't enough, she was already exhausted just from the warm-up. Still watching attentively, Abikura wondered what kind of exercise she planned to do. His question was soon answered when Hiyori, excited, announced that she was going to practice jump rope. Abikura thought this was indeed the ideal exercise for her, as it was simple and a way to build strength. She would surely handle it with ease. However, she couldn't complete even one full rotation with the rope, as she kept hitting herself with it before jumping. Abikura watched in shock. How could someone be so bad at jumping rope? It seemed like she wasn't even trying, and before he knew it, she was already completely tangled in the rope, yet making a face as if she had done everything perfectly. Exhausted, Hiyori decided to take a break, and the same thing as before happened again. She tripped over the rope and was about to take a nasty fall when Abikura appeared, this time managing to catch her in time. Hiyori was left speechless, and the zipper of the jacket reached its limit and came undone. However, only Abikura noticed this, and, of course, so did we. Hiyori then tried to explain the situation to Abikura, but ended up speaking incomprehensible words as usual. Now, after calming down a bit, she explained that the school was going to hold a big jump rope tournament between the classes in October, and since she wasn't one of the best, she thought she needed to practice a bit to avoid causing trouble. However, it was still only March. Not dwelling on details, Abikura suggested she try conditioning exercises, like cardio at home. Hiyori then said she had tried once but couldn't do it very well alone, and when she pushed herself too hard, she made strange noises that annoyed her neighbors. Imagining the situation, Abikura quickly concluded that her neighbors must have been quite frightened. But interrupting Abikura's imagination, Hiyori says that she should be able to do cardio if he helps her. As he assists her, he wonders how he ended up in such a wonderful situation while she continues struggling. Now, he can only think about how hard it is to stay calm in this situation. However, feeling the need to say something to distract himself, he absent-mindedly asks about her ideal type. He spoke without thinking, but she decides to answer, saying that her ideal type is someone serious, who expresses themselves well, teaches good lessons, and earns the trust of all the students. She misunderstood the question and simply described the kind of teacher she would like to be, which is the complete opposite of how she actually is. But he just thinks that he really hopes she can become what she aspires to be. She then starts pushing herself harder and harder, and now he understands what kind of weird voice she was talking about making. Days later, Hiyori accidentally drops one of her notebooks, and a student picks it up for her. However, after seeing what she had written and noticing her intense gaze, the student got scared and ran away. Everyone thinks she's a scary teacher, but in reality, she's weak and timid, though she works really hard. Later, on his way home, Abikura reflects on this and can't blame them for thinking that way. He knows she tries hard but still acts a little strange, and he wishes he could do something to help her. However, he quickly stops himself from thinking about it too much. He just wants a normal school life. With that in mind, he decides to stop by a store, buy a manga, and relax. But as soon as he enters the store, there she is, Hiyori, reading a book with tears streaming down her face. Abikura finds himself in the same situation once again, instinctively hiding while wondering what the hell she's doing there and why she's crying while reading that book. He then notices that she's reading an author's biography and realizes that she's even weak when it comes to holding back tears. Hiyori eventually decides to buy the book, and now Abikura is curious about what kind of book it is. As she walks past him, he sees that they're books on how to cure nervousness and techniques on becoming a better teacher. And just like that, even he feels like crying for her. At the register, Hiyori suddenly remembers something and checks her wallet, making him wonder if she doesn't have enough money. He can't believe that's possible, and she keeps counting her money until she lets out a sigh of relief. Everything seemed fine in the end. That is, until the cashier asks if she wants a bag, which would cost more than she has, leaving her in shock. She starts panicking, and after glancing at her books and the long line behind her, she decides to carry them without a bag. Abikura can't comprehend what just happened and simply thinks that there's no way she'll be able to carry all those books properly. She tries putting them in her bag, but they don't fit. To make matters worse, it's raining, making it even harder to get home safely carrying 3 books and an umbrella. Abikura quickly searches his own bag for something to help her and then rushes over. However, Hiyori turns awkwardly and slips in a puddle, crashing into Abikura. He has no idea how to react, and she apologizes, asking if he came to buy books too. He says yes and then hands her a plastic bag. She tries to refuse, not wanting to trouble him, but he insists, saying it's fine. He just happened to have one. It was a bit crumpled, but it was better than nothing. She accepts and places her books inside. Just then, a passing car splashes water from a puddle, drenching them both. He asks if she's okay, but when he turns to her, she's completely mesmerized by the bag. Thanks to it, her books were protected from the water, something that wouldn't have happened if she had bought the paper bag from the store. Abikura doesn't understand why she's so excited, but she continues, explaining that these kinds of things always happen to her, and asks if he gave her the bag knowing this. With a radiant smile, she thanks him again and says that she loves books. What she didn't realize was that after removing her soaked blazer, the water had made certain parts of her clothes a little too transparent. And so, Abikura realizes that his weak teacher is also weak when it comes to luck. The next morning, while heading to school still half asleep, Abikura is startled by Hiyori, who comes running, out of breath. He asks if she's okay and why she's in such a hurry. She tries to greet him first but can barely get the words out. She then tells him that this morning isn't going well for her, she overslept. Meanwhile, the buttons on her blouse are barely holding on, making Abikura think that she's weak even when it comes to mornings. Hiyori then informs him that today is the first day they'll have homeroom together and that he should hurry up. Another student walks past them, and she tries to greet him too, but fails, scaring him away. This reminds Abikura that his weak and timid teacher can, at times, be terrifying. In class, as his friend talks about sleeping through the first period, Abikura confirms that they do indeed have a homeroom today. It's the first time they'll be doing this in this class, and he wonders if Hiyori will really manage. Suddenly, she arrives, still out of breath, and tries to greet the students, but ends up scaring them right away. And so, the horror homeroom begins. She was doomed from the start, and now everyone is afraid of her. Hiyori then attempts to write something on the board, but it comes out all crooked, making the students think she's starting some kind of ritual. Abikura notices that her face is extremely red and wonders if it's from running this morning. She was truly terrified. Then, her box cutter falls to the floor. She bends down to pick it up, but somehow, her tights get caught on the leg of the desk, making her even more nervous and flustered than before. Not understanding what's happening, some students see her trembling while holding the box cutter and assume she's gripping it tightly to attack them or something, which isn't true at all. But right now, only Abikura understands the real reason. She probably can't move because of something else. He knows how much she was looking forward to this homeroom, so he can't just sit back and do nothing. He suddenly declares that he'll join the class committee, an excuse to go up to her. He tries to justify his decision while walking toward her and, when he reaches her desk, sees why she couldn't move. Her tights were already on the verge of tearing completely, and as if that wasn't enough, she had forgotten something when she rushed out of the house this morning. He wonders how in the world she managed to get into this situation, while she quietly pleads with him not to stare. She then explains everything to him in a hushed voice, and he wonders how he's supposed to help her without touching her tights. However, he can't just leave her like this. With tears starting to form in her eyes, Hiyori says she didn't want her first homeroom to end in failure like this, which is enough to make Abikura act. He quickly frees her tights from the desk. But since they were elastic, pulling and releasing them suddenly made Hiyori let out a tiny yelp. After a moment of silence, she stands up and tries to pull herself together to continue, while being completely embarrassed. The homeroom continued, and Hiyori tried to explain things to the students, but they didn't understand anything she was saying. They thought she was a scary teacher, but in reality, she was just a shy and weak teacher trying her best. The homeroom ended, and Abikura, who had saved his teacher, had now joined the student council, even though all he wanted was a peaceful school life. When he returned to his desk, Hiyori had left a message asking him to stay in the classroom because she wanted to talk to him. Reading that, he couldn't have been happier about joining the council. Hiyori then entered the room with a megaphone, and he was utterly confused. Abikura asked if they were going to talk about class duties, and she replied that it was kind of about that. Recently, she had been called to the principal's office, where they told her that her voice was very difficult to hear and asked if it was causing trouble during her classes. So, she thought that using the megaphone might help in some way. Abikura agreed that it was a good plan and mentioned that perhaps the reason she scared the other students so much was because she had trouble communicating. However, she wasn't aware of her reputation at school and didn't know that she frightened everyone, so hearing that left her in shock, breaking both Abikura's heart and mine as well. The pieces in her head clicked together, and she finally understood why people avoided looking her in the eyes so much. But then, she realized that Abikura interacted with her normally, and now that she thought about it, she recalled that he wasn't that proactive in his first year. That could only mean he was just like her but trying his best despite being scared? That was the conclusion she reached. But then, he changed the subject and went back to her brilliant idea of using the megaphone, asking if she could test her pronunciation. She did, and to his surprise, he could clearly understand every word, which made her super happy. She then announced that she would stand on the podium to see if he could hear her from farther away, and he could, perfectly. Excited, she asked if people would stop being afraid of her now, and he answered, "Absolutely." She asked if everyone would now be able to understand her, and he replied, "Definitely, yes." Then she asked if her feelings were reaching him, which flustered him. Hiyori then thanked him and said that he was saving her, catching him off guard. He looked away, embarrassed, thinking that she was indeed clumsy and weak, but he really liked her. At that moment, the megaphone slipped from her hands, and in the heat of the moment, worried that it might break, he dove to catch it before it hit the ground, leading them into an awkward and physically impossible position, which gave me a great frame to save. She apologized, and with the megaphone in hand, Abikura tried to say that it was okay, but the megaphone trembled. Without realizing it, he kept speaking, causing her to ask him to stop talking for now. Later, on their way home, before they parted ways, Hiyori said she was counting on him as the class president and that they would be working together now. And so, a strange misunderstanding gained strength. The next day, the physical education teacher announced that they would have a physical exam and that there was a special guest, who even tried to say something, but no one understood a word. But in the end, that didn't matter because our weak and shy teacher was excited to learn. Abikura was worried and wondered if everything would be okay. The PE teacher then asked Hiyori to start by measuring her grip strength, and since Abikura was the class leader, he was assigned to assist her while the teacher guided the other student. Now, alone in a corner, he found something wonderful. Hiyori, already holding the grip strength tester, was overflowing with enthusiasm to start. She then squeezed it with all her might, using both hands. Watching her, Abikura didn't want to interrupt, but he had to. At that moment, he was simply grateful to God that she hadn't been paired with anyone else but him. They then moved on to other exercises, which she could barely complete. And so, he was reminded once again that his teacher was really weak. The PE teacher then announced that they would now begin the long jump test, measuring two people together. Hiyori and Mizuki. Abikura was in shock because Mizuki was top tier in all physical and communicative aspects, and coincidentally, they now had the weakest and shyest teacher versus the ridiculously strong Jairu. While stretching, Mizuki noticed that she wasn't the center of attention this time. Once both were ready, Mizuki jumped swiftly and precisely, covering an astounding 50 meters. Turning around, she wondered how Hiyori had done. But she hadn't even moved from her spot and was still on the ground. She had simply collapsed from the gust of wind created by Mizuki's jump. Hiyori then apologized, saying she wasn't good at jumping, and then fainted from exhaustion. Abikura took her to the school infirmary, and after the nurse instructed her to rest, she left him in charge. Hiyori apologized for the trouble she had caused, but in the end, she said she had a lot of fun. She said that it was really nice being with the students, and growing weaker by the second, she mentioned that she would love to do it again. And because she was still exhausted, she collapsed onto Abikura, completely catching him off guard, saying she couldn't move anymore. Then, suddenly, she fell asleep right there. Moments later, he placed her in bed to rest and realized that his weak and shy teacher was also weak in physical exams. Now, from Mizuki's perspective, they were having class with the scary teacher, as everyone called her. She had been using the megaphone in class recently, and now at least they could understand what she was saying. But then, in one of the papers she handed out, her ID photo accidentally fell out. Some girls got scared and ran to Mizuki, who said she would protect everyone. At the end of class, Mizuki admitted to herself that she was also scared, but it was too soon to judge the teacher. However, when she returned to the classroom, she found the teacher and her accomplice opening up a stuffed bear. Without understanding anything, she could only feel fear. The plushie had a student's name on it, and the teacher had an injured finger. This could only be an invocation ritual, she thought. Trembling with fear, she realized that the scary teacher was actually terrifying. Hiyori recognized the student and wondered if she had forgotten something there, while Abikura quickly realized the situation. Hiyori seemed scary at that exact moment, and it was difficult to justify the scene. But the truth was that while practicing class with the plushies, she noticed that one was slightly torn, so she tried to fix it, accidentally hurting her finger in the process. Nervous about the misunderstanding, she approached Mizuki to explain, but Mizuki couldn't understand a word she was saying. The more Hiyori tried to clarify, the worse it got, and in the end, it was still understood that she was performing a ritual with the plushies. Mizuki then declared that the rumors were true true and that Hiyori actually ruled the class through fear, an absolutely insane assumption. She tried explaining again, but Mizuki refused to listen, rejecting Hiyori completely. Abikura then tried to explain as well, but Mizuki told him to shut up, saying there was nothing to hear from someone who had been brainwashed. She stated that everyone said the same thing, that he was her first pawn, which shocked him since he hadn't known that until now. Reaching her limit, Mizuki punched the wall, declaring that she would protect this school. And so, Abikura realized that the strongest Jiraiya's determination was too strong, and things could get bad, so he told Hiyori to run while he held Mizuki back. However, Hiyori was enthralled by Mizuki's strength and thought it was amazing, leaving everyone confused. She said that even though Mizuki was scared of her, she faced it head-on, which made her admire Mizuki. She was truly incredible, just like during the physical exam. She then tries to approach Mizuki again and explain that it was all a misunderstanding, but ends up kicking one of the chairs and falling onto Abikura and Mizuki. Once again, they end up in a completely impossible position, which immediately makes me think of a hamburger. Mizuki quickly gets up, completely embarrassed, while Hiyori apologizes. She says she became anemic due to the cut on her finger, and Mizuki then realizes that it was all a misunderstanding. Her scary teacher is actually more of a weak and shy teacher. Mizuki then remembers what just happened, and Hiyori, as always, apologizes to Abikura. However, by saying as always, it makes Mizuki think that Abikura has been taking advantage of Hiyori's weakness and shyness. She was ready to deal with Abikura, while he begged Hiyori to wake up and explain this other misunderstanding. The next day, Mizuki finds them in yet another difficult-to-explain situation and is completely embarrassed. Abikura tries to explain that Hiyori ended up falling while carrying some folders onto him, but she doesn't seem to believe it much. Then he asks why she's there, since the classes have already ended, but she retorts the same question to him. He responds that he's there because he's the class representative, and unlike him, Mizuki says she's there to see the teacher. She apologizes for the other day and says she can't believe she thought she was a scary person when she's not at all, and that she's always doing her best. Without beating around the bush, she immediately asks for her first name and, excitedly, asks to call her Hyorin. All of this made Hiyori very happy, enough to make her emotional. She explains that she's been trying to make friends with the students, but always ends up in misunderstandings, so she's truly happy, and Mizuki just asks her not to cry. Trying to comfort her, Mizuki hugs Hiyori to console her and says she's simply very cute. But their first impression of her was very negative. Abikura, watching everything from afar, notices that the distance between them has already decreased a lot, and how their communication power is on another level. With everything resolved, she says that Hiyori can count on her, and that she even thinks she could be a much better class representative, providing better support for Hiyori. Realizing that her position was being threatened, Abikura tries to stop her, but Mizuki continues and says that he's probably just exploiting her kindness, that he definitely has hidden motives. After hearing all of this, Hiyori just says that Abikura isn't that kind of person, because he voluntarily ran for this position, which makes Mizuki give up for now. Changing the subject, she asks if Hiyori needs someone to talk to, because she's really good at giving advice. Embarrassed, Hiyori says she has a very loud and clear voice, which leaves Mizuki flustered. But she continues and explains that she has trouble projecting her voice and asks for some tip. Mizuki says that Hiyori can count on her, and suddenly runs to the window and yells that Abikura is an idiot, which leaves him and Hiyori confused. She returns as if nothing had happened, and he argues with her. And Hiyori, who hadn't said anything until then, was amazed at how Mizuki was able to make such a loud voice. Abikura tries to convince her not to do the same, but she decides to try. And at the window, she yells at the top of her lungs, but her voice was simply too weak. Watching that, Mizuki says she should try to exert more force in her stomach, and shows the area where she should apply more pressure. However, Mizuki ends up putting too much force into the grip, easily tearing Hiyori's clothes and leaving both of them embarrassed. She apologizes and says that sometimes she can't control her strength, asking Hiyori not to cry. But Hiyori says nothing, mentioning that she's already torn her stockings like that before and that she's used to this kind of thing. However, Mizuki doesn't believe her and ends up tearing her skirt as well. That way, she wouldn't be the only one embarrassed in front of Abikura. But then he takes off his and gives them to Hiyori to wear, and thus the three end up in this completely random and embarrassing situation, which makes Hiyori laugh sincerely. After that, Mizuki started showing up all the time, and they could no longer be alone like before. While studying at home, Abikura couldn't help but feel lonely because of all this. But he tried to convince himself that it was okay to sacrifice their moments together. After all, she was happier. As he tried to refocus, he was suddenly called. His sister appeared and commented on how studious he had become. Startled, he pulled back and asked her to knock before entering. This was his older sister, Abikura Akemi, 29 years old, and my friends, I'm in love. Look at this beauty. Anyway, she said she came by today because, since it was a holiday, she thought she could take care of her little brother. Excited, she asked if she could clean his room or if he was hungry and wanted a snack. However, he refused. He said his room was already clean and that he had already eaten so she could relax. This shocked her. Protesting, she started crying, saying that now that they were living together, he suddenly decided to become so independent. But he quickly blamed her for this, saying that she was the one who spoiled him all the time, even though he was too old for that. So, before it became a real problem, he decided to start doing things on his own. Staying dependent on his sister wouldn't help him live a balanced life. That's when she remembered something. She pulled out a pair of socks from when he was a child, saying she had taken good care of them despite working. He immediately told her to throw them away. Clearly, she was a bit obsessed with spoiling her little brother. Moments later, Akemi commented on how focused Abikura had been lately. She wondered if it was because he was in his second year now, since he hadn't been like this before. Was it because he became the class representative? Since he had been coming home late, had he joined a club? She was genuinely curious, but he simply replied that it was because his new homeroom teacher was a bit weird, and ever since then, he had started enjoying school more. Hearing this, Akemi said that even if he wouldn't let her spoil him anymore, as long as he was happy, she was happy. But then, in her purest One-chan form, she declared that she needed to spoil someone, or she wouldn't survive for long. Little did she know, I was dying to be spoiled by her, just like everyone watching. Meanwhile, at Hiyori's house, she was taking a bath and reflecting on how it had been a month since she became a teacher. Despite all the struggles, things were finally starting to settle down. She thought about the person who helped her through that chaotic start and said his name, Abikura. Stepping out of the bath, she muttered that she needed to thank God for giving her such a kind and friendly student. She dried her hair, got dressed, and was finally ready. Since it was a holiday, and she had just moved into a new place, she was set on meeting her neighbors. However, the moment she took her first step, she tripped. Meanwhile, at Akemi and Abikura's house, the doorbell rang. Akemi excitedly went to answer it, and moments later, she was making a commotion, calling someone cute and calling for Abikura. He had no idea who it was, but his sister was already going crazy wanting to spoil someone. When he looked, it was his teacher. Akemi was already holding a warm bowl of soup and had completely dominated Hiyori, leaving Abikura utterly confused. Hiyori snapped back to reality, noticed Abikura, and immediately froze, completely bewildered. Surprised, Akemi asked if this was the teacher he had mentioned and assumed she must be their new neighbor. But she found her so adorable that she couldn't resist giving her a lap pillow. Realizing that his crush was living right next door made Abikura feel like he was dreaming. However, Hiyori, unsure of what to do, nervously announced that she would be moving out immediately. She had no idea Abikura lived there. She only chose the place because it was close to the school. Panicked, she said there was no way he could relax knowing his teacher lived next door and that she would move as soon as she had the money. Abikura tried to calm her down but failed. That's when Akemi stepped in. Holding on to Hiyori, she scolded her, saying she shouldn't waste her money on something like that, calling her a bad girl. She added that Abikura himself had already agreed to her staying, so there was no reason for her to move. Hiyori tried to resist, but Akemi kept closing in, and then she made her promise her new One-san that she wouldn't move out. Completely overwhelmed, Hiyori gave in and promised. Watching all of this unfold, Abikura was speechless, while Akemi simply said that Hiyori was a good girl. She had found someone new to spoil. Only then did Hiyori ask who she was, if she was really Abikura's older sister. Akemi confirmed it, saying she was taking care of her little brother. Akemi then asked if she was really Abikura's teacher, saying she looked more like a high schooler. Hiyori introduced herself, explaining that it was her first year as a teacher. Akemi was surprised, saying that it was rare for someone to start as a homeroom teacher right away and that it must be tough. Concerned, like a true One-san, she asked if Hiyori was eating properly. Hiyori replied that she was, but Akemi immediately saw through the lie. Pinching her cheeks, she told her that lying wasn't good and asked again if she was eating well. With no way out, Hiyori admitted that she hadn't been eating properly because she was too busy and usually bought convenience store meals. Seeing this, Abikura, who had been silently watching, realized how hectic his teacher's life must be. Without thinking, he wished she could eat and sleep better. And as if reading his mind, his sister declared that Hiyori should stay and eat properly. Hiyori tried to refuse, but Akemi insisted it was fine. Estimating that Hiyori must be around 22 since it was her first year teaching, she hugged her, calling her a baby who needed to be spoiled by her new One-san. Then, noticing Abikura's presence, she ordered him to go to his room and study. She said she wanted to continue spoiling Hiyori, but with her student watching, she couldn't fully relax. Being dragged into his room, he realizes that now his sister is going to unleash everything on his teacher. Already inside, he tries to refocus on studying, but 10 minutes later, he realizes that leaving things like that isn't a good idea. He knows his sister too well. Knowing she will cross the line, he rushes to the living room, only to find them trying to convince themselves that taking a cold bath would be fine. However, both of them were dressed in nothing at all right there in the living room. Hiyori sees Abikura, turns completely red, and panics. Akemi, on the other hand, calmly explains that they were like this because they were about to bathe together. But Abikura could only wonder why they were doing that in the living room. Unlike Hiyori, Akemi was perfectly fine with the situation and even asked Abikura if he wanted to join them. She was completely insane, clearly. Hearing this, Hiyori, of course, protested, but Akemi justified it by saying that high school students were like children, so it was fine. Moreover, as a teacher, taking care of her students should be normal. Lost between right and wrong, Hiyori, already overwhelmed, ends up calling Abikura to join them. He, however, refuses and runs back to his room. A few days pass, and Abikura is extremely happy that Hiyori has become his neighbor. However, he tries to stop thinking about it, reminding himself that they have an ordinary relationship and that he shouldn't get too involved. But as he places his futon on the balcony, Hiyori appears on the balcony next door and greets him with a beautiful smile. Stunned, he barely reacts as she asks if that was his futon. She keeps talking, but all he could do was thank God for this moment and for having her as his neighbor. He finally wishes her a good morning and asks how she's doing and if she has already unpacked all her things. However, upon glancing inside her apartment, he sees that it's a complete mess. She tries to say that everything is fine, that nothing happened, but something definitely did. Suddenly, Akemi appears behind Hiyori and tells her not to lie. Abikura immediately asks why she's there, and his sister says the door was unlocked, calling Hiyori careless. She then overwhelms Hiyori with her big sister aura, making her confess the truth. Hiyori explains that the move turned everything into a mess, and that she lost an important document in the process. Upon hearing this, Akemi is ready to help but suddenly receives a call from work and has to leave. She apologizes to Hiyori but says that Abikura will help her find what she's looking for. Entering Hiyori's apartment, he asks what exactly she lost. She explains that it's some printed papers containing each student's weaknesses, all compiled in one night. He realizes this is a big problem. Noticing his concern, Hiyori clarifies that she didn't use their names, only their seat numbers, and included no personal information, so he doesn't need to worry. With that said, they start searching, but the odd feeling of being alone with her takes hold of Abikura, making it hard for him to focus. He soon finds a closed box and asks if he can open it. She agrees. However, what he finds inside is not the document, but something quite peculiar of hers. After a brief pause while holding it, reality sets in, and both of them turn red. She tries to explain, saying she doesn't always use things like that, and that it's not usually on display. That she only wears it on weekends, among other excuses, as her voice gradually fades away. Abikura quietly puts the box aside and continues searching. After checking a few more, he finds one full of fish plushies she uses to simulate her lessons. She notices and quickly grabs one, happy she didn't leave them at her parents' house. Seeing her excitement, Abikura can't help but comment that she really likes fish. She responds enthusiastically that she loves them, not only because they have unique bodies and lifestyles but also because they taste great. She then happily resumes searching for the document, which makes Abikura find her incredibly cute. After opening several boxes and finding nothing, Hiyori wonders if she left a box at her parents' house. Feeling down, she mentions that they're about to start a new topic in class, and that she wanted to resolve this before then. But, having no other choice, she decides she'll just have to redo everything in one night. Not liking the idea of her losing another night of sleep, Abikura intensifies his search, and surprisingly, he finds some papers stuck at the bottom of a box. He quickly grabs them and asks if this is what she was looking for. Hiyori confirms, saying she had already given up on finding them, and sincerely thanks him. She's overjoyed that her hard work wasn't wasted, when suddenly, some boxes, seemingly pushed by spirits, are about to fall on her. Abikura manages to pull her away in time, but somehow, a little accident happens, and just as she had said, Hiyori does wear peculiar things on holiday. The next day, Abikura sees his teacher apparently heading home. Since they live close, he calls out to her, wondering if it would be a problem for them to walk home together. She recognizes him and immediately notices he looks exhausted. Tired, Hiyori starts talking about a problematic student in class whom she hasn't been able to convince to attend school. With a new semester about to begin, Abikura remembers the always empty seat. She says she's been taking notes for him, hoping he'll return, but it has been quite difficult. Hearing this, Abikura asks for his address and offers to deliver the notes, reasoning that, as the class representative, he should help her relax a bit. She smiles, thinking that it might actually be a good idea. On their way there, Hiyori warns him that the kid they are visiting is rather strange and maybe even a little problematic. When they arrive, Hiyori rings the doorbell and announces herself. Suddenly, something small dashes past them, hides behind Hiyori, and attacks her two attributes, leaving her completely speechless. Abikura, in shock, wonders who that is. Before he can ask, the child beats him to it, demanding to know who he is. She says she knows who Hiyori is since she visits sometimes, but she never said she'd bring an idiot along today. Abikura tries to say he heard that she was absent, but the child angrily retorts that she wants to be called by her name, Yuki, not you. Abikura wonders if this short-tempered brat is really someone his age. She looks more like a kindergartner. Before he realizes it, Yuki is already back near Hiyori and once again attacks her attribute. This time, Abikura steps in and pulls her away. He asks if Hiyori is okay, and she says no, but that he shouldn't make Yuki angry. Maybe, being so lonely, this is her way of showing affection. How naive. Not believing it for a second, Abikura insists on talking to Yuki alone as a fellow classmate. Hiyori wishes him luck. Inside the house, Yuki tells him that barging into people's houses like that makes him an intruder. Ignoring her, Abikura tries to explain that girls have important parts and that Hiyori is just being nice. But what Yuki is doing is basically a crime. Indifferent, Yuki argues that truants are usually seen as sensitive people, so if anything happens, she might just refuse to return to school altogether. Besides, Hiyori has worked hard for her and even managed to open her heart a little. She confesses that, at first, she thought Hiyori was a ghost. But since she kept coming every day, Yuki eventually realized she was just clumsy and found it funny. That her big attributes won her over. She then asks if Abikura is only with her because of that too. He denies it. Still trying to reason with her, Abikura says he's sure Yuki wouldn't like it if someone did the same to her. But Yuki smirks and says she wouldn't know, because no one has ever done it to her before. Annoyed, Abikura decides to show her exactly how it feels. However, something was off. The one he thought was a boy was actually a girl. Yuki, completely embarrassed, runs to Hiyori crying, telling her what Abikura did. But all Hiyori understands is that he finally made Yuki open her heart to him. Abikura even tries to apologize to Yuki afterward, but still clinging to Hiyori, she says that if there are guys like him at school, then she doesn't want to go. This leaves Hiyori completely shocked. Now, on their way home, she says that she doesn't know what to do anymore and that she absolutely doesn't want to force Yuki to return. She thought that by visiting Yuki every day, they would eventually go back to school together. Hearing all this, Abikura realizes that he ruined everything and apologizes, but Hiyori says it's not his fault, though the sadness on her face was evident, and he couldn't stand seeing that, knowing it was his fault. So, the next day, he goes back to Yuki's house. She thought it was Hiyori ringing the doorbell, and was already running to grab onto her assets when she was surprised to see Abikura. She asks what the hell he's doing there and where Hiyori is. She says she has nothing to talk about with a pervert, which makes Abikura think she was talking about him. But without beating around the bush, he says he came to apologize for what happened, and so he does. However, he also has something to say, that Yuki being happy just by doing those things is something quite superficial and limited. She doesn't understand anything. Abikura then asks her to just talk to the teacher at school for a bit, but she quickly refuses and was about to leave when he says that Hiyori has sides she's never seen before and asks if she's satisfied seeing only that. This gets Yuki's attention, and she asks if she can really see those other sides of the teacher if she attends school. He confirms while recalling something. Yuki surprisingly believes it right away and tries to find out more, but Abikura says he can't say anything else, which makes her even more eager. And after putting so many completely twisted expectations on why she should go to school, the doorbell rings again, and Yuki runs to it. It was Hiyori. She announces that she's going back to school. Hiyori is completely confused and tries to find out how Abikura convinced her, but all he could do was silently apologize. Then, out of nowhere, Yuki suddenly announces that she'll return, but Hiyori must let her enjoy her assets one last time. With no way out, Hiyori agrees, but today something was off. She wasn't wearing something she usually does, and the headlights were visible. She says she did this already thinking that Yuki would want to do that and didn't want to ruin anything. It makes no sense, but no one cares. Without wasting time, Yuki immediately begins to enjoy her moment, and Abikura can only turn his back and listen to everything. Yuki enjoys every last second of Hiyori's determination until she reaches her limit and says enough. And that's where we wrap things up. If you enjoyed the video and want more recaps like this, please leave a like, a comment, and if possible, subscribe to the channel. It would help me a lot. See you next time.